And
oh my god, what?
on Phil Halls and Kron Gracie. Those were the two ones. Someone dropped like $35,000 on Phil Halls, and another person dropped like $50K on Kron Gracie. Yeah. The only thing that prevents that from being as funny as it is that if they're betting that kind of money, they can almost certainly afford to lose it. 'Cause I feel like anybody who's that fucking stupid betting on Phil Halls against like a prospect, like what would compel you to do that?
Let's motherfuckers. Nothing else to say but that to those bets.
All right, folks, welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. That time, something tells me you just said "oh."
I said "yo."
Oh God! Now we're not even getting the full syllable. We're not even getting the consonant that begins the one syllable word. God damn it, you oi bruv bastard.
Keeps you on your toes.
Boy, the guy who calls you the oi bruv, he would be very shocked by the story that you told me at the start of our call today.
Yeah, don't tell the podcast listeners that. It'll ruin my massive amounts of street credentials.
The oi bruv and his day trip to Cambridge. Yeah. Welcome, folks, to Heavy Hands. We just had UFC 288 last weekend. As gratifying as it is when like an undercard like Song Simone is like sucks, as much as it looks like it's going to, and the whole it's the bad cards that always deliver thing falls on its face, as it should. Sometimes the good cards don't deliver. I don't feel this was a particularly great card for as relatively stacked as it was top to bottom.
I thought it was alright.
It was fun. I had a good time watching it, but I was also like, I'm a degenerate. I had that feeling about halfway through the main card. Maybe immediately after Kron Gracie. I was like, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah, I mean, I just felt like the sins of the Muhammad Burns booking I was ranting about last week.
Yeah.
Like, they really came to bear during the actual fight itself.
That's a good way to look at it. That makes me feel better. A curse on the UFC.
Was like Sterling. It was like Sterling TJ, but it was for 5 rounds.
Yeah. They rat fucked their two top contenders, and they paid for it with frankly, I mean, people out there know I'm a diehard Belal remember the name Muhammad fan, but let's be honest, an abysmal fight. A fight that I thought I was like anticipating people saying how shitty it was while I was watching it, because I could feel it, but I was like being a contrarian in my head. I was like, it's interesting. It's not a bad fight. And it wore out its welcome by about round 3. I was like, I'm not enjoying this anymore.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, like most of the fights, we had like some drama, we had some potential upsets, some actual upsets.
That's true.
One extremely funny fight in Cejudo. I mean,
yeah,
it wasn't like not by any measure a good fight, but definitely one which I found extremely amusing. I mean, so there was variety to it. And I thought the main event was actually like it was a good fight. It was.
I agree.
Mostly contested, like neither one of the guys like let it necessarily slip away from them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just like a good solid fight. Yeah, it was. I mean, it was unfortunately it was really the Belal Burns stinker.
I think that really was it. Yeah,
which put a damper on everything.
Yeah, they had some pretty good momentum actually going up to that point, and a nice balanced diet of just weird fights. Diego Lopez completely overperforming expectations. Yan Xiaonan getting a KO. I'm pretty sure we talked about how little power she had last week explicitly.
Yep.
Knocking Jessica Andrade out with that really quite impressive counterpunching she has. Yeah, it was Muhammad Burns. You know what? That's what they get. Unfortunately, it is also what we got, but that's what the UFC gets for booking a fight that, as you pointed out last week, neither fighter deserved to be booked in. I
mean, my main issue with this is that, like, obviously, this offers Dana the chance to be like,
well,
it's Colby time. He's so exciting.
Well, he was going to push that shit through anyway.
Yeah, but imagine if there's some kind of controversy in the Leon versus Colby fight. I can 100% see Dana being like, well, Burns had that terrible fight, couldn't finish. Muhammad had that terrible fight, couldn't finish one-armed Gilbert Burns. So, he's going to be fighting Shavkat Rakhmonov. They're definitely going to be the number one contender after that. Meanwhile, we're doing Colby Leon 2.
Yeah, you are absolutely right about that. Yeah.
It was like when they did that thing where they had all the four of the top light heavyweights fighting each other. And,
yeah, when it was like Machida and Shogun both got impressive KOs on the same event. And Dana had said beforehand.
Yeah, it was whatever. Like, these top four are going to be fighting.
Yeah,
and
whoever
then,
makes me clap
will get a title shot, and then it ended up being like Chael Sonnen or something.
Yeah, whoever makes me clap my pudgy little hands together harder tonight is definitely getting the title shot, and he just fucked them both. Yeah, classic. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess we lost out. We had to see a shitty fight. Muhammad and Burns lost out. The UFC, being the house, somehow seems like they still win. But anyway, enough about everything else. There was the main event that I agree was a very pleasant simmer all throughout, a very well contested fight. Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo for the bantamweight title. Well contested, but I also found that this smacked of Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold. In that neither fighter necessarily looked as impressive as they could against a different opponent. They sort of, or maybe a bit like Moreno Figueiredo 3. They sort of like, it was great, it was really fun to watch, very interesting, but they seem to just sort of cancel each other out. Each guy trying to gain the momentum and maybe not doing as much with it as he should at various points in the fight. Each guy maybe not fully understanding how important it was to do some pretty straightforward things like go forward. There was a lot of strategic drift, I guess I would say, for both fighters here. Sort of not very much clarity in what their game plans were, what they were actually trying to do to convert their good moments into an actual decision win, or work towards a finish. That being said, I agree. I thought it was a very interesting fight to watch.
Yeah, it was good fun. And in many ways, it was just it was an interesting exploration of what these two guys look like when they're up against just a really awkward style matchup, as it turned out in both ways.
Yeah,
because Henry is used to being able to just tank damage and fire back.
Yep.
And his concession to that in the Cruz fight was, the low kicks, which weren't as available for a couple of reasons here. One, that Aljamain Sterling was checking a bunch of them, and two, that Sterling just doesn't leave his legs out there as much as Dominic Cruz does.
Yeah.
And yeah, Sterling, I think, and this was something I think that bastard Zane Simon said.
Oh no.
Cejudo is going to be the fastest person he's ever fought.
Yes.
And that was clearly very true as well.
Yes.
Because you could tell that he wanted to do sort of the Pedro Munoz
exactly,
kind of, and to some extent Piotr Jan volume to keep him occupied plan, but Cejudo was able to just back out of the pocket much faster than he was comfortable with, because it would have, to chase him down would have meant sitting in the pocket with someone who would very clearly also wanted to just sit down and trade with him.
Yeah, I agree. That seemed very much like the key factor for Sterling's little missteps or losses of focus, which, is not something that's entirely unexpected from him. Like, he is definitely a fighter who, throughout his career, has been prone to what to some people might look like coasting, but to me, I always regard as confusion. He's not entirely sure how to proceed.
It's just, he's one of many fighters who I think just mentally runs out of steam, because it's a very stressful, complicated thing to do.
Yeah.
Classic examples being like Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler.
Yeah. And I think to that end, the Pedro Munoz fight, which I think, to sum up our talk last week, we sort of said, do what he did to Pedro Munoz, but oops, this guy's much faster than Pedro. I think that was kind of our conclusion for how Alja should fight, and that is what it looked like. I mean, in the Pedro Munoz fight, that was difficult in the way like a weight cut is difficult, I think. He got hit a ton. It was very uncomfortable, but I think psychologically it was quite simple. Very straightforward. This guy is in the pocket. He is chasing me. He's not really cutting me off all that well, but he is coming after me the whole time. I just have to keep hitting him because he's going to keep giving me the target, and that is how I keep him from running me over. That was, to this day, it still is one of Sterling's most impressively consistent performances. As hairy as it was, as much as he got tagged and hurt a few times, and it was very competitive throughout, he really, really stuck to his guns, and what, looking back, feels like, for Sterling, like a shockingly violent firefight. And yeah, I really do think the speed was the difference here. There's also the fact that Cejudo, yes, he did start to ramp up the pressure the more as the fight went on. He realized that that's what he needed to do to win. But he also just wasn't presenting as many targets, not just because of the speed, but because he wasn't nearly as high output as Pedro was trying to be back in that fight. And I think for Cejudo's side, the problem really seemed to be the reach. He fought Dominic Cruz, but the kicks were available. That was his way around the reach, his way around the movement. Sterling, when he was moving like that, was generally too far away to even try to fire kicks at. And when he was doing more of the anti-Munoz approach, standing his ground, keeping his jab going, it felt like Henry wasn't exactly sure what the safe way to close on him was. He didn't seem to feel comfortable, putting a ton of volume out there, even when he was coming forward. So
yeah, I think that was something else we called out as well. It's just like, Sterling is a big bantamweight.
He is.
And Cejudo is just he's just a thick bantamweight. I mean, he's never going to make flyweight again. That is for sure.
Yeah.
But, so much of it is just head. But yeah, so what else to say about it? I think Sterling did a good job of... I think his jab was very important for him in this fight.
Yes.
It was really his most consistent scoring shot. I think, the first time I saw Aljamain Sterling's striking and thought, this is genuinely decent, was when he flashed he won a fight basically largely off his body jab against, who was it?
Augusto Mendez?
Yeah, I think it was.
That was an early Sterling winning a fight on the feet performance. Possibly the first one.
I think that was the one. But yeah, he's got a really good body jab.
Mm-hmm.
When he uses it. I mean, partially because his sort of I don't necessarily want to say level changes, because this comes through into a different a different point. But I mean, he does change his level. But he's, constantly feinting kicks, switching stances, and so on. And it does allow him a way of stepping in and disguising what else he wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I found myself thinking is that, Aljamain Sterling does not have many setups for his takedowns, really.
No.
He is very, he does have lots of things where he will change his levels and he will, lower his base. The aforementioned body jab and so on. The amount of time, he didn't really have many shots in this where it wasn't immediately apparent to Henry Cejudo that this was a shot. I think rather than having a visual mix-up between what his shot looks like and what one of his other strikes look like, I think he steps forward and then decides at the last moment, depending on whether he sees the opponent waiting and trying to step forward themselves, whether he's going to turn that into a takedown.
Maybe.
In terms of the Frankie Edgar overhand or body shot to overhand and knee tap, or the Chad Mendes uppercut, anything like this, there isn't really a classic Sterling level change threat. I mean, I was just thinking, he will throw a big overhand every now and again. Just his penetration step doesn't look the same. I think that was one of the reasons why Cejudo and before him Jan was just able to stuff so many of those takedowns.
Yeah, well, I think this is a problem that goes back a very long way with Sterling. This is why his game felt so disconnected and dysfunctional before he learned to box. 'Cause the boxing keeps him alive in the fight. It allows him to, frequently now, actually win. Whereas when he's on the back foot, his takedowns are extremely obvious. There's one here, I'm just watching now, at 2 minutes, 15 seconds into in round 4, where he tries to do an uppercut into a shot. And it's you can just feel him overthinking it. The uppercut itself has no setup and comes very slow. And so it feels like a ruse. As it comes in, it's the way he level changes in and he has to do this full stance switch. And maybe that's part of the problem too. Sterling appears to be a southpaw wrestler, like many right-handed fighters are, and he does the majority of his boxing out of orthodox.
So he has to take literally 2 steps forward.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a super fast or convincing backhand that he can kind of fall through on like so many other wrestle boxers do. I think it is an off the back foot thing. When he's being more proactive, when he's running people down, and I think then it's because either he gets in on a shot when they've already collapsed against the fence, or he crashes into them in a clinch, which I wanted him to do more in this fight, because in the clinch, he was actually out-wrestling Henry Cejudo very impressively. The shots were completely unsuccessful. But when they got to the clinch, and Sterling got underhooks, Cejudo was a little overwhelmed at points. It was oh, this guy is really quite big and has a shitload of leverage. And he can just
kind of... also able to land a lot more in the clinch generally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I think he should work on his clinch game more and more. I think it's a strong area. It is a place from which that transition from striking to wrestling and grappling naturally exists for him. And tall guys should learn to clinch. Get underhooks as a guy who's a head taller than your opponent. You are going to literally be able to pick them off their feet with relative ease. And that's what happened here. Cejudo was so impressive in every wrestling exchange, except when Sterling was able to get at least one underhook and body lock him. And then he was actually able to kind of horse Cejudo around a bit, like I've seen few fighters actually do. Cejudo himself said after the fight they had a nice moment backstage. He was like, "You impressed me with the wrestling." He did not expect Aljamain Sterling to have any wrestling success against him, clearly. And then I believe Sterling said, "You did too," and Cejudo said, "Did you see the splits?" And they laughed. These two had a fun dynamic. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
And of course, Murad.
And I was glad to see that, Cejudo also was, enforcing the broad strokes of the game we sort of said he should. That he wasn't shying away from his own wrestling. He wasn't being I was saying, like, the issue is that I worry that he's fallen in love with his own striking.
Yeah.
And that he's not going to wrestle. He did wrestle.
Yeah.
And he didn't overly, he got, the front headlock position. He had that darce on, sort of like he was going for, like, a darce or a ninja choke or something on Sterling. But, was really, a lot of it was just posture breaking and looking to tire Sterling out, which is exactly what we sort of said is what he should really be focusing on.
I thought he could have leaned on it more, honestly, as Sterling was doing all that shooting. I mean, in a round that we both agree, after the fact, Sterling definitely won, round 3. That's one where he shot and missed, I think, 6 or more, like, ugly reactive takedown attempts. And, I thought Cejudo could have done a little more work from the front headlock. I mean, he shut those takedowns down so easily. Why not just, like, make Sterling miserable and try to gas him out and work on, apparently he had that neck surgery. He's got a artificial disc in his neck. Why not, like, try to test that and just stick him in, like, a quarter Nelson and just grind on him and crush his head down to the floor. Could have been bad. But, I think ultimately what decided this fight was Sterling just being a little more willing to take the targets that were available to him, landing his jabs, landing that left body kick, landing his own low kicks more and more as the fight went on. And the fact that those targets were more available to him more often because of his reach. And Cejudo delivered quite a low output performance, just kind of being stuck at that range, waiting for Aljo to make a big mistake. And really the only mistakes Aljo made on the feet were strategic, were running away too much, backpedaling too much, giving Cejudo momentum. Every time that he was taking smaller steps, doing a little more of the footwork approach he took to Pedro Munoz, he was kind of outboxing Cejudo.
I was saying this before we started recording, but this it did remind me of Gilbert Melendez, Ben Henderson.
Yeah.
In that it was a fight where, in general, I think it was a very closely contested fight.
Mm-hmm.
I do think the right guy won. He won whilst putting up a bunch of optics, which normally go terrible.
Right.
With normally just go awfully with judges, skirting the cage, like backing away, generally, like, and normally judges like guys who look
assertive,
cross, and like enraged, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those ones where this time it didn't seem to work. And weirdly enough, unlike, Aljo doesn't have Ben Henderson's ability to just shrug things off.
The swagger.
Push his hair back out of his face and just be like, I guess that was all right. He's constantly looking pretty stressed in there.
Yeah.
So, it is remarkable that he was able to win this, but in the end it was, we're not going to talk much about the scoring, but it's one where there's like, He wins 2 clear rounds, and Cejudo wins 1. And that's... as we've said many times, just like statistically, that's how... that's just it's just a big advantage to have the clear rounds. That's just how it works.
Mm-hmm.
He's... Sterling won 1 and 4, Cejudo won 5, and 2 and 3 are very close.
Yeah. yeah, even, I mean, I wasn't doing my best job as a judge, which, perhaps now enough time has passed, Phil, where people will not immediately mock me for some of my worst scorecards in the past. But, I'm tweeting, I'm like not fully paying attention to the fight for every single moment. Because of that, essentially I was paying about as much attention as your average UFC judge. And he got my ass. I mean, I literally gave round 3 to Cejudo because of bad optics. And in review, I actually reversed rounds 2 and 3. I was like, Cejudo, this was very competitive, but Cejudo is reversing the momentum of the fight here. He landed more strikes. Round 3, in retrospect, if you're not, scoring against Sterling for missed offense, which you should not do, defense does not score in MMA, then it actually is a fairly clear Sterling round. I would say this is one of those fights where I think there's genuinely a better case for Sterling 49-46 than there is for Cejudo 48-47.
Or at least they're very comparable, I think,
yes.
In likelihood. I think, yes. In general, you're going to come out with a Sterling win with most of the scorecards you look at.
Yeah, I think 1, 3, and 4 are all, with 3 being the least, but all pretty convincing rounds for Aljamain Sterling. So,
I mean, I found 3 very, very closely contested. Like, it starts off with a pretty bad moment for Sterling. He gets he gets a flying knee and then punched off it, and then ends up in a poor grappling position. He ends up in a poor grappling position. Like, you don't want to get bookended. Like, it's a
right.
So it's very close and competitive. But yeah, just like from a statistical perspective. Yeah, I mean, I did also think, this is definitely Cejudo, the smarter, older fighter in not the best ways, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I was saying beforehand, I doubt we're going to get like Navidez Cejudo ever again.
Right.
Version of him.
Yeah.
It's just like, I am going to go absolutely berserk.
Yeah.
And just absolutely destroy whoever is in front of me. Because honestly, a version of him might well have...
Yeah, I mean...
In fact, probably would have beaten Aljamain Sterling.
Being just as difficult to out-wrestle, just as testing as the Munoz fight, but having that speed advantage, having the power I think Cejudo has that comes from that speed. Yeah, for sure. At the very least, like, you have a fight like this and then in round 5 you go full Cejudo. Mm-hmm. Who knows what happens on a gassing Aljamain Sterling if you just try to tear his head off for 5 minutes straight. Yeah.
Although, it's also worth noting that, like, I think Aljamain probably does hit a bit harder than people give him credit for.
Absolutely. No,
Cejudo was busted up at the end of this, and, the, stories from this card were ones about, like, reminding us never to necessarily bank on someone being immortally durable.
Yeah, and not to count somebody's power out if you're at the same time assuming that their opponent is going to literally run at them. Mm-hmm. That could turn, if Holly Holm can look like a power puncher when somebody runs at her, then literally anyone can. Mm-hmm. And so we'll be talking about that fight you just alluded to, Yan Xiaonan, Jessica Andrade, I'm guessing.
And there's 2. It's also Frivola Drew Dober.
Oh yeah, of course. Of course. We will be talking about that. Oh, and Phil Hawes, whose legendary chin was also cracked on the prelims. Wait, what?
Yeah.
We'll be talking about...
Were you giving betting advice to someone, Connor?
Yeah. Yeah, why? What happened? We'll be talking about that and the smattering of the rest of the undercard, basically, as we go forward in today's episode. I think we may find time at the end to talk about one fight from next week's cursed card, which frankly has a couple cool things on the undercard. Yeah, like a few that I'm fairly interested in. and unfortunately has a main event and co-main event just designed for me to like bounce off of and not be able to engage with. But it does have Daniel Rodriguez versus Ian Gary on the main card, and that I find to be a very interesting fight. So we may try to squeeze that one in. Anyway, after this, Belal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello folks, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. It's Belal Muhammad, Gilbert Burns.
Appropriately, thrilling intro we had for that one.
Yeah. Okay, and we will be right back after this break. Yeah, I mean, this was, it's funny you mentioned, TJ Dillashaw before. Dillashaw Sterling, rather, because, I had the thought watching this, that this was the second time that Aljamain Sterling was on a card with, somebody who, as far as I could tell, had a somewhat pre-existing injury that really
they haven't actually come out and said that.
No.
They did say that Belal had injured his ankle beforehand.
Ooh, got out there first. Yeah, that was known, right? That he had some kind of leg injury, something.
But Burns, I don't think they've said that it was a pre-existing.
This is just an impression, so this could be completely inaccurate. The impression I got from their reaction in the corner, Henry Hoof's reaction in the corner, was that they were aware of this issue, but that it had been aggravated in the fight. That was the impression I got, that Burns had some difficulty with his left shoulder already. And maybe that also explains how shitty his fight with Masvidal was. Maybe the dude is just falling apart.
Yeah, that's a bleak way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Not an inexplicable one.
But seriously, yeah, maybe he is like literally he's 36. I mean, he might just be past his physical prime and he's like picking up injuries and breaking down. He's been fighting very actively this year. But aside from an incredibly predictable win over Neil Magny, they have not been impressive performances, not close to the standard that he set in like 2021, 2022. He's looked really flat, and it looks like older Gilbert Burns on the feet in these last two fights. And in this case, it had something to do with an injury, apparently to the shoulder. But just another, like, unfortunate aspect of what was already an unfortunate booking, really. Because I don't think this couldn't have been a fun fight. But it wasn't. It just wasn't.
No, it was pretty dreadful. Yeah, so, I mean, the main thing for me, like, is looking back through it, see how much did Gilbert Burns throw before his shoulder got hurt? And the answer is a lot.
Yeah.
Admittedly, you know, he might have been wanting to feel his way into the fight. It was a 5-rounder.
Yep.
Other kind of stuff. But realistically, for someone who's himself generally been like good strategically, and you know, someone who comes from a camp which reinforces the idea of aggression, you should basically know that the first round is time when you should be beating Belal remember the name Muhammad.
Yeah, you certainly shouldn't be getting dropped twice in the first round. These aren't, according to UFC stats, not considered official knockdowns, but you shouldn't be getting visibly hurt and knocked off balance, at the very least, by Belal in the first round.
Which is, in and of itself, quite concerning, because, as we've said many times before, Belal, remember the name Muhammad, has never actually knocked anyone down in the UFC.
Yeah. He is a remarkably powerless puncher.
Yeah, so, I mean, this was a pretty passive performance by Gilbert before the shoulder win, and that seemed to just encourage him into, I mean, unsurprisingly, you know, I'm not going to be like, he should have just gone out there and fought through it, goddammit. But, you know, it wasn't like he was, it wasn't like he had a crescendo of activity that would just suddenly drop to a whisper after his arm went out.
Exactly, yeah.
This was a pretty tepid performance from him. Even before the thing happened to it. Yeah,
I mean, literally the worst round of the worst lost round of the fight was the first. Before the injury was even, you know, caused and or aggravated. That was his worst round of the fight. That is a really piss poor position to be in against Belal. I'm sorry. Yep. Yeah, but even before the whole injury narrative took hold, I was like, is Gilbert just like overtrained? You know, that fight with Jorge was only 3 weeks ago and he didn't look good in that. Is he shot? Like, I was legitimately trying to figure out before the injury narrative what was wrong with Gilbert Burns, because I think something is wrong with Gilbert Burns today. Not just his shoulder.
Yeah, it didn't look good. Yeah, as I said, he got dropped with a jab by Belal Muhammad, which is a good sign. Yeah, after that, it was just it became this weird dynamic where, like, Belal didn't realize that, Gilbert's left hand was gone. So Belal was, like, mostly doing a lot of his work with the left high kick, which double duty in causing Burns to have to, in a sort of legally like Bisping versus Dan Henderson way, it meant that Burns just had to shelve his right hand because he was constantly blocking left high kicks and he couldn't come back with anything to counter off them. Which I don't think was like deliberate by Belal, because you could see basically later on in the fight when they realized that Gilbert's left hand was hurt, he started spamming right head kicks, because he was like, oh, I can just make him block these and it's gonna fuck his arm up.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible he had the idea of, that's a pretty common idea, is to just keep the hand you're afraid of occupied on defense.
I mean, I think that's entirely what the plan was. I don't think it was like, it was an idea of like, he doesn't have a left hand. I think he was just I would like to keep his right hand at bay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think ended up contributing to the tepid nature of the fight, which was just that Belal was just following him around the cage.
Yeah.
And Burns was waiting for the chance to counter with the right hand, but Belal was mostly just throwing a big left high kick.
Yeah.
He was like, well, I can't counter that because I just blocked it.
That's actually kind of interesting that you could view this as like one of the first times that Belal Muhammad has suffered because of his remarkable ability to stick to a game plan. This was a case where a little adaptiveness would have been more than welcome, because he had a wounded animal in front of him and maybe could have done more of what he did to Sean Brady, but against Sean Brady, that was the plan, which is why he came in and was like tanking shots and just like pressing in no matter what happened. He was going to gas this dude out and beat him up, and that was the plan. Here, the plan, I mean, really, he wasn't even all that eager to pressure until quite a bit later in the fight, because I think his initial plan was actually to kind of run Gilbert around and, expecting Gilbert to get frustrated and chase him and sting him with shots and kick his legs and, befuddle him. And, he just like didn't seem to sense that he could kind of do whatever he wanted at a certain point and go out there and win the fight. So, A couple questions answered. I mean, Belal Muhammad's takedown defense more than held up.
Yes, I mean, more than held up. It, in many ways, easily won him the fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, against another of the...
That's how his...
True.
That's how Burns' shoulder went out.
Yeah. But, you know, against another of the best wrestlers he's faced, we had that question again. How tested is this guy's takedown defense? It just, at this point, I'm happy to say that even against an even more accomplished wrestler, I would count on Belal to stuff most, if not all, of the takedowns. Because,
I mean, it's like Robert Whittaker, you know, before he fought.
Right.
You'll remember, you can be like, look at this guy's previous fights. Chance Rencounter is not the greatest wrestler in the world, but if you look at how if you look at how Belal, remember the name Muhammad, addresses takedowns, you can see that this person is going to be very hard to take down.
Yeah, mechanically he is on point. No matter who is trying to take him down, he gets his underhooks very quickly. He has a very quick sprawl, and he is pretty much always, almost always, just in a good stable position with his feet to begin with. He's a very balanced fighter. He doesn't overcommit. He doesn't put all of his weight on one leg or the other. He's just never really in a vulnerable position to be taken down, or at a vulnerable range to be taken down. So, yeah, that's another test passed for Belal Muhammad. Unfortunately, the test that many fans are increasingly subjecting him to, are you incredibly boring to watch, was not passed. And, I still love Belal. I like a thinking fighter. I like a guy who overcomes a lot of physical disadvantages. Even in this one, we talked before we started about the bad commentary. They kept talking.
Oh, what? You mean Belal the Titan Muhammad?
Yeah. What the fuck were they talking about? They kept talking about how huge Belal is. They're like, look at his legs. I'm like,
yeah?
Gilbert's way more muscular than him. What are you talking about? It's like they just looked at Wikipedia and reminded themselves that Gilbert had been a lightweight. Gilbert was a big fucking lightweight. He's not like taller than Belal, but he's like just as thick as him and more muscular. I did not understand where that narrative came from. They kept saying it.
I mean, he's by a large measure, apart from Gilbert, he is the smallest.
Yeah.
Like elite welterweight.
What the hell were they talking about?
Colby?
Maybe?
Amaru? I mean, we're not even talking about like Shavkat and Kamzat.
Yeah, the actual titans of the division.
Yeah. Oh, like Belal, remember the name Muhammad? Yeah, that was particularly bizarre.
What the fuck?
Just like, you can see him. He's over there.
You're looking at him right now. Is
like,
he?
It's mostly head.
Was it a thing where every time DC made that remark, it was because Belal was just standing closer to him and he forgot about perspective? Like,
maybe.
Yeah, Gilbert's much smaller. He also has a faint blue tinge, as though he's in the distance. That's strange. I never noticed. Has Gilbert always been blue? Yeah. Anyway, a really tepid fight. I think the explanation that Belal basically couldn't get off what otherwise looked from the get-go like a good idea for how to win the fight, could not get off those tracks very quickly. And when he tried, genuinely did actually make things more difficult for himself at times. Like, there were a lot of super clean right hands that Gilbert landed. Not a lot, but every time he really committed to it, he tended to land. And Belal took those shots perfectly well. But I think it was because he was basically like, Belal just, he didn't plan for that tonight. And like a lot of great game planners, if he doesn't plan for it, then he sort of turns himself for each fight into a very kind of a guy with a very narrow sort of skill set and style. And he kind of seemed to be like, yeah, literally stuck in the rut that his training had created for him, which is usually such a strength, but can be a hindrance.
Yeah, I mean, in defense, there have been many fights where people have gotten badly injured. and it's gone worse than that. I mean, Belal has at least proved that he's better than John Jones.
Which one are you referring to?
Who didn't even beat Thiago Santos with no legs.
Oh, that is a very,
alone one. Also just like, I mean, I can forgive it because he won every single round.
Yeah.
And, just in general, that's why I like Belal, remember the name Muhammad, because he tries to win fights and he will do the thing which allows him to win fights. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I like MMA as a whole, as a sport, because it is combat sports at their most utilitarian.
Mm-hmm.
It is literally just saying, what is the best way to win fights? That is the raison d'etre of the sport in general.
Raison d'etre.
And so Belal just being like, here's how this fight is won. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it really hard and really consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Is that's just what I want to see. I just want to see people who try and win. And if the best way of winning is by being exciting, that is great. Often it is. It's generally a very exciting sport. But if you are despite his massive size, a physically underpowered, a physically underpowered that's just who Belal remember the name Muhammad is. That's how you're going to have to win these fights. And I'm still a fan. This fight just sucked.
It did suck. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's unfortunate that it's like Belal has the curse of a solid movie with a shitty ending kind of thing. People just remember the negative part. So the association with Belal, between Belal and boring fights is inescapable at this point, and this certainly didn't help. But the guy has plenty of fun fights too. That Sean Brady fight was awesome. The Vicente Luque fight was a lot more fun, even though it was a very committed sort of defensive strategy. It made sense, and it was against an opponent who was trying to test that as much as he could. The Diego Lima fight was awesome. Lyman Good fight was awesome. He has a really healthy mixture of different approaches. That's why we find him so impressive. But
I mean, because when he's in serious trouble, he will try and turn the fight around again as hard as he possibly can.
100%.
Going all the way back to that first fight that he had with what's his face? Guy who's a model now, Alan
Joban. Yeah, he was a model then.
He was just getting torched in the first round.
Yeah, and ended the fight almost finishing Alan Joban. I mean, being Belal, he couldn't manage it, and somehow still didn't get a knockdown in that fight. He just had him on wobbly legs for a couple minutes. But I mean, I don't know how you can't kind of root for Belal. It's just as close to an average Joe who thinks his way out of tough situations and also is just a gritty motherfucker. When fights are difficult, Belal Muhammad will fight as hard as anyone. And sometimes that ability, as in the Sean Brady fight, is baked into the game plan from the beginning, even. Sometimes he will use that willingness to take damage and create discomfort. He will use that very proactively and not just as a fallback. But you also get fights like this and, fights that suck.
Absolute trash.
It was trash. It was really bad. He's a cool guy. I like how he gleefully got on the mic afterwards and just told New Jersey they sucked. I mean, he's a very charming heel from my perspective. I don't really see how people find it in their hearts to get riled up by Belal Muhammad of all people. He's pretty sincere, corny, you know what I mean? It just seems like a guy to me, but, I know a lot of guys with Belal's personality just here in Northside Cincinnati. So, it is what it is. I still like the guy. The fight was shit. Let's take a break. When we come back, Yan Xiaonan, Jessica Andrade, and a smattering of other things. We have to talk about Kron Gracie. It's we just have to, because I need to release some anger. Maybe we'll squeeze a short little bonus episode out here. I published the one from 2 weeks ago, very late, like just before the event. So we owe the people some bonus content. And I was also thinking of doing a, boxing commentary of some time. One of my favorite fights, maybe. I don't know. That's a discussion for another time. For now, we're taking a break. When we come back, Xiaonan Andrade, Kron Gracie, after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to the show. Yan Xiaonan, Jessica Andrade, a women's strawweight fight. This Andrade's attempt to come back from getting shockingly outstruck by Blanchfield, and the comeback from that occurrence was to get even more shockingly outstruck by Yan Xiaonan.
I was being extremely dismissive of this fight, and you were like, well, what about Yan Xiaonan's counterpunching? I was just like, I don't care about her counterpunching.
I think she's a fun fighter.
Xiaonan.
I think she's a fun, interesting fighter. She's crafty. She's a little janky. I thought she was really impressive in the Marina Rodriguez fight, but I also picked against her here on the vivisection. I was like,
this was one of those ones where I was just like, sure. I mean, she might make things troublesome from Jessica Andrade.
Yeah.
Like, how is she going to win?
Exactly.
How is she genuinely going to win this fight? And honestly, in retrospect, I don't regret saying that at all. I would do it again. This was just a mad outcome. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, sure, Jessica Andrade looked terrible. She looked like the exact opposite of. Well, she looked like a combination of skittish and insanely over-aggressive and wild.
Yeah,
which would be terrible. But it was the fact that I just never would have believed that Yan Xiaonan would capitalize on that, or either the duration or the or with the necessary power to actually change the dynamic of the fight. To
deliver what was functionally a one-shot KO. Yeah. I mean, I think the stoppage was quick. It was a classic women's MMA stoppage. But also, she did drop her flat on her ass with one punch. So.
But yeah, I didn't have any issues with the stoppage at all.
No, I if you're erring on the side of caution, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I don't need to see follow-ups every time. It was a super hard, clean punch and a big knockdown.
Yeah, I mean, I just would have been like, sure, Jessica Andrade might start off looking bad, and it won't matter because she's incredibly hard, and Xiaonan doesn't, and she'll just chase after her until she hurts her. But,
yeah,
I mean, Xiaonan looked super sharp.
Yep.
Just landing at will, low kicking Andrade from far away, and B, yeah, she just knocked her dead, which I mean does lead you to think pretty much the same thing we were thinking with Gilbert Burns, has an incredible schedule of just being the person who takes the fights every single time, and goes out there and goes for it every single time and soaks up damage and so on. Mm-hmm. Is this finally catching up with Jessica Andrade?
I did definitely have the feeling afterwards that the division or divisions have maybe kind of passed Andrade by. I mean, one of the major reasons I didn't pick Xiaonan, I think I said some incredibly vapid thing well, she's not Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I think the reality is that doing what Joanna did to Andrade is not really that tall an order. It shouldn't be. Like, oh, keep moving, keep your jab in the opponent's face. If they overswing, counter them, and then reset. Like, it's pretty...
But as said, like, Caitlin Chukagian tried that.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, and people are always going to try that and get punished for it, but it shouldn't be something that is impossible to do against a fighter as, frankly, one-dimensional as Jessica Andrade. A fighter who is incredibly hittable and ponderous when she's at range, and then basically goes through cycles of getting really mad and impatient and running at her opponent. Just swinging. Like, frankly, maybe the only reason she didn't get knocked out by Joanna, or hurt more often, is that she was really quite patient throughout that fight. And didn't overcommit an awful lot, and didn't try to make too much chaos happen. She really picked her spots. But the basic thing of, like, not moving too much, which I think was part of Chukagian's problem, was just like, she's just trying to skitter away the whole time, and it just, Andrade smells blood and is like, an ill-trained dog. When you run away from it, it just has to chase you. She put herself in that position. Xiaonan was a lot more like Jędrzejczyk, and it made me think, like, that's really not actually that high a bar to clear. You just stay in good position. Don't hang your chin out there. Keep your feet moving, whenever you need to. Otherwise, put shots out there, because this woman is open to be hit by practically everything. And
I mean, she was still pretty close to getting clipped at certain points.
Of course. Well, yeah, it's going to happen. But that's the thing. If you're Chukagian and your response to it's close to getting clipped is to fly away, it's not going to go well. You have to accept that, yeah, Andrade is going to come barreling towards you, and you are going to have to stop her by taking advantage of your better position and sticking her before she can stick you, and then getting out of the way. That's how you deal with a mad bull. You can't just pivot out of the way. You got to stick the little sword in there.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, both this and the Frivola Doba fight had exactly the same thing happen in them, which is, like, really early on, the squat immortal person, or seemingly immortal person, action fighter type, just, like, steps in and just gets nailed with the absolute hardest punch that the other person can throw.
Yeah.
It seemingly does absolutely nothing. And in both cases, I was like,
oops.
I was just like, oh yeah, that's just that's who they are. That's who Jessica Andrade and Drew Dober are. Like, both cases, I just thought, man, those chins are cheat codes. Also, found myself thinking, can't do that many more times in your career.
Yeah.
Like,
or in a single
the Frivola
fight.
punch knocked Dober out was, yeah, extremely hard. But, like, as I said, there's one, like, right towards the beginning of the fight where he just, like, it lands cleanly on Dober's chin as he's stepping in. And, yeah, in both cases, I was just like, how many more times do you expect to be able to just shrug off your opponent's, like, hardest punches without any ill effects whatsoever? And as it turned out, the answer in both cases was, like, 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, that's how much longer you can expect to be doing it for.
Honestly, yeah. Yeah, and I think for these fighters, too, I mean, that is... eating that early punch can be part of the process that gets them knocked out. It's either like, oh, I'm fine, or, oh, you think you can hit me, like, now I'm mad. Or a combination of the two that, like, boosts both your urgency and your confidence that you can take their shots and you need to go after them and see if they can take yours. But, yeah, I mean, I thought Yan Xiaonan looked good. Like, this wasn't entirely about Jessica Andrade's chin maybe wearing out or her style being figured out. Yan Xiaonan
looked sharp.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't, I mean, the Rodriguez fight was sort of, this was sort of building on that performance. She looked like I was discrediting her as a counterpuncher, but you were right. She looked like a genuinely, like, good, dangerous counterpuncher.
She has, like, a real knack for it. Yeah, I thought I'll say it again, I thought she won that Rodriguez fight, by the way.
It's very, very close.
Yeah, it was close. I thought she just landed the cleaner shots. Rodriguez basically, I think, got rewarded for coming forward more, even though she was not cutting off the cage and overreaching on all of her strikes. And because of that, every time Xiaonan did land, it was like a super hard counter when she was out of position. But yes, very close. But, yeah, that was the first time where I really took note. It's not the first time she's landed good counter punches. I mean, fuck, looking back, like, Yan Xiaonan's resume looks really good on paper. She feasted on Karolina Kowalkiewicz at the lowest point in her career, but before that she had the win over Angela Hill, another corpse in Claudia Gadelha, and then a loss to Carla Esparza, which unfortunately will not age as well as it should, because for a long time Carla Esparza was one of the toughest and most unique tests in the division that everyone's just going to shit on now as her legacy. But yeah, the Rodriguez fight, super close, probably a win. Shutting out Mackenzie Dern with only a couple scary moments, and then just flattening Jessica Andrade. I mean, sharp counterpunching. What I really like about Xiaonan is how much she counters in combinations. It was a single shot that ended this fight, but actually the sequence I really liked was maybe 30 seconds before, when Andrade was barreling in, and Yan Xiaonan, like, baits the rush with her right hand. She gets a little out of position, so she has to reset. She lands a kick, and then Andrade tries to barrel into her to keep punching her, whiffs on a big left hook, and Yan fires a straight right, pivots as she's throwing it, so she's already creating the angle, and then a super sneaky left hook, which was the shot she kept surprising Marina Rodriguez with. Just another layer to the counter, which to me is a classic mark of a really high-level striker, is when counters or traps are sprung in layers. Like, if you're hooking off the jab because you see the guy overreaching to parry your jab, at a high enough level, that's not going to work, because like he's going to be aware of the trap that you're setting. But what might work is feinting the jab, throwing the hook, and firing a right hand immediately on its heels, so that while he's still focusing on not getting trapped, that's when he gets punished. It's like a higher level version of how positioning works in a striking fight, where you don't get behind the guy and hit him. You get slightly to his side and hit him while he is working to make sure you're not slightly to his side anymore. You gotta seize those little moments when your opponent is adjusting. And that's something Xiaonan is pretty good at, is finding these little opportunities and then capitalizing on them with more than just like a single strike before frantically skittering away. She's got the boldness of a good counterpuncher, which is something that a fighter like Caitlin Chukagian, at least for a long time, lacked. She will stand her ground and make you pay for overcommitting and stumbling into her range. I like that.
And, you know, division is fairly open. I mean, she's basically got to be the next challenger, right?
Yeah, they were talking about an all-China fight for the women's strawweight title. And I think it could be interesting. I mean, I don't know. Weili Zhang is... If you found her fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk interesting, you see some of the parallels here between, frankly, how much more emphatically Xiaonan handled a like back foot counterpunching fight against Andrade. Who knows? I mean, being a rangy fighter with a good jab, with good linear kicks, who can counter a wild swinging power puncher, I'll still favor Weili Zhang, especially with the wrestling. Given what happened,
I think that's the main thing, right?
Yeah, given what happened to Jan in the Esparza fight, but yeah, why not? I like her.
Yeah, I'm genuinely impressed.
Speaking of genuinely impressed, how about that Kron Gracie?
Am I alone? I really enjoyed this. I thought it was.
I enjoyed
funny.
it too. I enjoyed it too. I actually thought it was a very good performance from Charles Jourdain, like a super disciplined performance in which he still built to a head of violence over the course of the fight. In fact, thanks to Charles Jourdain, it was prevented from being just completely hideous and boring. And the fact that one of the fighters was just trying to be hideous and boring that entire time, it was kind of funny. Like, but I was also like, I was genuinely like disgusted with Kron Gracie. I try not to feel that way about fighters, but you may remember my reaction to that Claudio Puelles fight. I can't even remember who he was fighting, but I was like, you should be ashamed. This is not a fight. You don't fall on your fucking ass and try to get the guy to jump into your guard and pull guard because you don't have anything resembling a functional way to actually win the fight on your terms. You can't make it happen. And so you're just going to make the fight absolutely dreadful, like hoping you get lucky. That's not fighting. That's bad. That's embarrassing. And the crazy thing here was that Kron Gracie wasn't like that before. He went in there and had a fit.
This was truly classic Gracie stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing. I honestly felt like watching this that, cause famously, like, I guess, is Rickson his dad or?
I don't know.
I just assume it's a vast system of nephews and uncles. That's the entire Gracie clan.
Yeah, I assume it's like some kind of.
Yeah.
Like the Saudi royal family or something like that, where there's just tons of, like, there's just a very wide interconnected, like family.
Yeah. So Uncle Father Rickson was, made no bones about how disappointed he was in Kron's fight with Cub Swanson. A very fun fight, by the way, which I think every MMA fan watching came away from impressed with Kron Gracie. Like, wow, he really like went in there and stood toe to toe and tried to take Cub Swanson on the feet. It didn't work, but it was a brave performance. A respectable performance. And Rickson was like, he should not have tried to box with Cub Swanson. He should have used Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And I honestly think
Rickson, like one of the more, actually, I don't want to say that. You can't really say that. I was going to say one of the more annoying members, but
that's a stiff
many
competition.
of the members of the Gracie family are annoying in their own unique ways.
Yeah, that is some stiff competition. But Rickson certainly is like, really on like the cynically, like entrepreneurial, like.
Oh yeah, the whole like, he won 300 fights.
Snake oil
all
bullshit.
By finish, and there's no record of any of them, and you're just like, whatever, man.
Yeah, the most sort of charlatan snake oil. I mean, not the most, but he's in that category of Gracie's.
Exactly. You have to do the same thing I did, which is say that and then think about other Gracies.
God, this family sucks. But I genuinely felt like his shitty family, dumping on him for a really encouraging performance. Because it wasn't the way the Gracie is supposed to fight. Because obviously, Royce Gracie style jiu-jitsu is still going to dominate modern MMA, you fucking dumbasses. I think they literally like bullied him into fighting like this. I think he stopped boxing training and he came in and they were like, you're going to grapple. You're going to beat this guy with your grappling. And it was one of the shittiest performances I can recall seeing in the UFC.
The alternative is that like, he chose to do this as like, a passive-aggressive way of showing them how stupid they all look.
That would be much funnier. I would respect that.
Like here, this is what it looks like, you guys. This is what you look like. Look, watch this. Plod around after this guy.
No, this is you. This is you.
If he'd done more like jumping sidekicks.
That's what I was gonna say. He really, if that was the point he was making, he should have done more Gracie stomps. He really should have let Jourdain just thrash him for trying the worst. I'm obviously trying to grapple you striking you've ever seen. Yeah, but like if that's your approach, if this has anything to do with his family saying, oh, you have to grapple, you have to use your jiu-jitsu, which is legitimately very good. Like Kron Gracie is a fantastic grappler. And you could see even just getting full guard, which is obviously a mostly bullshit position in modern MMA, Jourdain had to be extremely careful. Like, which he was. He kept his hands on Gracie's body almost every moment that he was on top of him, even just in his guard. They were pinned on his chest. They were on biceps. They were on his shoulders. He was not allowing his hands to go to the mat. He was not allowing his arms to be isolated, but you could see how much attention he was having to pay to that, how much of a threat there genuinely was. That leaving one limb isolated might lead to terrible consequences very quickly. That is the level of submission grappler that Kron Gracie is. But if your plan is to use that, maybe practice your fucking wrestling. Huh? Uncle, nephew, father Hickson, did you think of that? Maybe if jiu-jitsu is going to be the way to win the fight, learn to take someone down. What the fuck is this running at him? And in the first round, he ran out of takedown ideas and just proceeded to pull guard for the rest of the fight. That doesn't work. It does not work.
It was, I think after his first attempt to run Jourdain into the fence, when he backed away afterwards. He just sort of sighed. Like, I can see how this fight's gonna go.
Oh, I don't know how to wrestle.
Right at that point, I was like, he seems tired and mentally defeated. We are like 2 minutes into this fight.
Yeah, he really did.
This is gonna be long and, again, probably pretty funny. At least partially because I saw something where, like, people were signing posters, and Henry Cejudo was trying to like talk to Kron. He was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna." And then Kron just like very audibly said to someone else, like, "Just let me know when he's done." Just walked out. It was like Henry was like, "Oh, don't know what he was." It was just like
he had a problem with Henry or something.
Yeah, and Henry seems like I know who Henry is. He's just like a cheesy.
Yeah, he's a bit much,
mostly.
But he seems like a pretty nice guy, and all things considered, like he just comes on strong. But he's not like he's an aggressively nice personality, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, he was, as you said, he was like he is like broken down his fights with DJ, including the ones that he's lost. He was like talking it up with Aljo afterwards. He was a great loser after the fight.
He really was.
Just like, like, seems like a pretty nice guy, to be in all honesty. But yeah, I mean, and just the idea that like, no one says that like Kron had to like him or anything, but why just be like, in his earshot, be like, let me know when he's done. I don't want to be around this guy. Just don't be a dick, man.
Fuck you. Yeah.
But yeah, this was funny.
Yeah, knowing that does make it even more enjoyable to rewatch. Just what a miserable time he was happening from almost the first minute of the fight. A couple plaudits for Charles Jourdain, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, he didn't do he stopped himself from Charles Jourdain things.
No flying knees at all.
Oh, this was Charles ground Jourdain.
Yeah, yes. Very much. I did not get that play on words at first. Yeah, he was just really, really solid. And because he's Charles Jourdain, that did not mean that it was a boring performance. Again, for as fun as this fight was, as weirdly fun as it was, almost all that fun had to do with the fact that Jourdain was so capable of dealing with the shit show that Kron Gracie was trying to drag him into. He stayed.
Yeah, I mean, at least this was an actual, like, two true outcome fight. That it was like, if Jourdain gives up a takedown, he's probably going to get submitted, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But also, he was someone who was very capable and sort of not only capable of beating Gracie up, but also like incapable of not beating him up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't.
Jourdain was never going to resist an invitation to beat someone's ass.
Yeah. That's what I love about Jourdain is like he will find one shot he can land on you. I have noted this since day one when who did I scout Jourdain for?
Feely?
Yeah, it must have been for Andre Feely. Yeah. And so I watched, at a certain point, I watched a ton of Charles Jourdain fights. And I was like, oh, this guy's insane. He's completely reckless. He flies at people. He throws 9 flying knees per round. Like he cannot stop himself. And yet, no matter how insanely all of these fights begin, and that used to be the MO for Jourdain, is like a functional slow starter who refused to start slow. A Carlos Condit kind of thing where he just had to put himself through the ringer immediately and usually lose or at least put himself in some high risk situations right out of the gate. But invariably, you would get to the third round of any fight that lasted that long, and Jourdain would be like finding stuff and building off of the things that he had discovered through that apparently chaotic process. That is something he has always had. He is an observant, creative fighter who never, ever, ever runs out of ideas. He has too many ideas to start with most of the time. But when something works, he's not only going to keep doing it, he very naturally builds on that and figures out what else he can exploit because of that. When the jab starts to land, he is noticing your reaction to it. When the uppercut starts to land, Jourdain is thinking already, the left hook is going to be coming after that soon. When you pile into the clinch and he feels pressure going one direction, he is already thinking of how he can dump you. And once he realizes he can dump you, he's thinking of how he can use that off-balancing movement, assuming you're going to figure out how to recover, to smash you with a knee. He's a really great building fighter. And to see him keeping that, but on top of an increasingly like disciplined and careful game that is no less fun for being careful, is really cool. Like, this dude has grown a ton in the last 3 years. I really enjoyed seeing it. By the way, his clinch game is awesome. That is like consistently a highlight of his fights. And one of the major reasons I think that, he did not suffer. I mean, first of all, there wasn't a real takedown threat. It was more just the idiotic guard pulling. But even given that, a lot of people who fight like a, Claudio Puelles or who's the guy with the Ryan, why can't I think of his full name?
Hall?
Ryan Hall, who fights that kind of, will get very frustrated and not be able to get into any kind of rhythm, because there is this threat that you can easily solve, but solving it just puts a massive dent in the productivity of the rest of your game. You become overcautious of the takedown attempts, or you think you have to stay too far away. You're just worried of all the weird ways they might try to get into their grappling positions, and your output tanks, et cetera, et cetera. And that was not the case here. Jourdain, as always, more aggressive, higher output the further the fight went on. And a big part of that was the clinch, because Gracie would crash into him and he would just punish him. The way that like Joanna Jędrzejczyk used to do to people who insisted on trying to grapple her. It's like, you think you want to tie up with me? He did the same shit to Shane Burgos, who genuinely completely out-wrestled him in the first round. And then every successive attempt to tie up with Jourdain just got worse and worse and worse for Burgos because of that very Muay Thai style striking clinch. It's awesome.
He's just a great fighter.
He's just a lot of fun, isn't he?
Yeah. And I said, I picked Gracie to win this.
You did?
It was very gratifying. Yeah.
Why?
So I was just like, he's going to run him into the fence and take him down. I didn't realize he was going to go for a synthesis of his, he's going to go for the grittiness of the consistency of his approach to Cub Swanson with the like complete pointlessness with like also, but he's also not going to have worked on any actual wrestling.
Yeah, he was going to call on his ancestors.
Just going to be plodding forward. So yeah, as much as I picked Kron, this was very fun to watch.
Kron, man, you could maybe redeem yourself. Knowing that little interaction with Henry, it makes me less desirous of that. But me, the like fat slob who's talking about you from the safety, I still have the temerity to say you should be ashamed. You should be ashamed of yourself. Bad fight. Good fight. Bad performance. Good fight through nothing to do with you or your efforts. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. I think we're going to try to cram in a couple of undercard fights here in a quick bonus episode when we're done. So make sure you head over to patreon.com/heavyhands to check that out. Also, find us on the Twitter, at Evil Greg Jackson, at Boxing Bush. Next week, of course, we have a card with a truly dreadful main event and co-main event lineup. But then fortunately the one after that, Mackenzie Dern main event. So it's all going to be fine. We have a flyweight main event after that.
Good. The first one in however many, like 100 events or whatever it was.
Kai Kara France, Amir Albazi. Hey.
They're going to give it the undercard that it... Well, they're not. They're going to give it the shittest undercard imaginable. Like an absolute...
I got to be honest. The undercard looks about, if anything, on par with some of the weaker ones here, but no worse. So, who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky and it'll be one of those unstacked card that delivers. Certainly the main event will be fun, because flyweight fights are fun. Anyway, that's in the distant future for now. We'll be back next week to slog through the knee-deep shit of heavyweight and light heavyweight MMA with all of you. We hope you are looking forward to it more than we are. I was going to say as much, but more. I hope you are looking forward to it. And until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.